All right, everybody. Welcome to my first official video. One of the things that I wanted to do was kind of talk about my writing journey up until this point, and so that way I can catch you guys up and you can be with me through whatever comes next. But I did write a book called The Broken World, currently available on Amazon as a hardback or an ebook. And this has kind of been my passion project. This is, when you talk about like having an art baby, that's definitely mine. And matter of fact, these characters, David and Dust Bunny, they go all like way, way, way back. I mean, I think I was probably 7 or 8, in the back of the car headed to the hospital, one day, just, drawing stickmen because that's what I like to do. And those characters, they kind of evolved and they became, this project and this story that I'm really proud to kind of be a part of as a writer. And I think collectively, this book right here, it took me close to 10 years, and I definitely have witnesses and proof of that. And the reason that it really took me 10 years is because it does mean so much to me. And of course, as a writer, one of the first things that you really kind of end up deciding, it's not the first thing that you should decide, but it's the first thing that you end up thinking about, right? It's like, how am I going to get published, right? Like, I have this story and that's great, but I want to know how I'm going to get it out there, right? And so, you think to yourself, well, do I want to do like the traditional publishing route or the self-publishing route, maybe a hybrid route, and so you end up thinking and researching about all of these things. And, 7 or 8, 10 years ago, self-publishing didn't really feel, then like what it is now. And so that was a big driver for me. Was I was looking at my story at this, kind of middle grade fantasy that I wanted to write that was, equal parts goofy and ridiculous and grounded. And I was looking at like the self-publishing industry, and not only were a lot of the self-published, independent books that I was reading, they really just weren't good. Like the quality of them, and the quality of independent books, even today, is still something that I think we as independent authors struggle with, because you can just click a button and say upload. It's all too tempting to just say that you have a first draft and then pay $35 for a cover and then throw it up there, right? It's all too easy. But I really wanted to try and make something more than that. And also at the time, self-published, books on Amazon were predominantly, shapeshifter romances or vampire romance or romance, romance, romance. Even a lot of the, like the story websites like Tapas or Wattpad, they're primarily dominated by these romance stories, and so I have nothing against that. But my book's not entirely a romance. It does have a lot of romance in there, as we'll come to find out. But at the same time, that wasn't really the best marketing place for my story. And so I was like, I just don't feel like maybe that's the route to go. And so I also was then kind of looking at the traditional route, and I was thinking to myself, well, hey, it seems like if you want to be like a for real writer, like the traditional route is the way to go. And so, unfortunately, a lot of those 10 years, were spent kind of trying to take my story, and turn it into something that I thought, a traditional publishing company would appreciate. I had always wanted to tell these shorter stories. I was actually really inspired by like the classical Nancy Drews, right? And they're very similar, to kind of what I've got going on here. And but it's just that kind of small hardcover book, very episodic fashion that you could read, in 1 or 2 sittings at the office or the waiting room or wherever it is you might be, right? And that's what I always wanted. But because traditional publishing, the more you research it, they it feels like they want you to have like a certain size of book, a certain type of book, and so I ended up going through like a lot of revisions and a lot of changes where I tried to make my story kind of fit that program. And I did send out a couple of query letters, and most of the time, it's just rejection. But a lot of the change for me to go back into self-publishing was I began to see a bit of a shift, and that shift was that traditional publishing did not seem to have the same allure to it, and that in a lot of cases, self-published authors were beginning to produce content that was just as quality and awesome as what we were seeing in the traditional space. And so that was kind of a signal to me, 3 or 4 years later, that we could potentially go a self-publishing route and not just create a book, but create the book that I wanted to create and not have to worry about kind of everything else. And so there's a lot of things about the traditional publishing route that, over the years, I just wasn't really cool with. You know what I'm saying? I don't mind sending in, a query letter and, kind of waiting a couple of months to get back on that. But at the same time, it just feels like there's a lot of sludge, that you kind of have to go through. And then once you get to that point, you spend all of these years working on this project and, putting all this effort into it. When you finally get it to the publishers, they basically kind of take and do what they want with it. And you have a lot less control than you did before. And so that was really something that kind of changed my mind, as things began to shift. The traditional publishing route, when you look at what they make, they do have a marketing campaign. They do have resources that you as a self-published author simply do not have, right? Unless you're a trust fund kid or something like that, right? There's a lot of marketing ability and just publishing know-how that they have that I don't have, right? And I don't have access to. But at the same time, when I look at a lot of self-published authors these days in the fantasy space and the romance space and the slice of life, like whatever you want to do, it's kind of becoming much more common to see really high quality work. And so my goal then became to kind of write a story and put together a book that was self-published but did not feel self-published. And so that was really what I spent a lot of time on. And so in order to do that, I did, make some decisions that, looking back on it, were kind of dumb. But at the time, to me, that was me being determined to make something happen. So for those of you that kind of know about self-publishing, this little book right here, okay, when I tell you this little book right here, it cost me a lot of money to make. For example, just to kind of go through some of the cost process of what it took to put this little hardcover book together. So when I had finally written the book, right, like one of the things that I really felt was that, my family, they were super duper supportive like the whole way through. And I would, hand them, like a draft, and they would read it. They would be like, "Hunter, this is the best thing ever. I absolutely love it." And I would be like, "Hey, thank you so much, but I cannot believe a word that you say." Not because it's not true, but because you're my mom, you're my dad, you're my grandma. You guys, of course, are going to love it, right? Even some of my close friends who I might toss it out to, they would read it and they'd be like, "Hey, you know what? This is pretty good." And I'd be like, "Hey, thanks. I don't trust that for a second, right? Like I need it to be good, to people that don't really know me." And so, if you are familiar with the self-publishing process, one of the things you go through is a developmental edit. And so I did go onto a website called Reedsy.com, and that's a very cool website for a lot of different reasons, and I'll do, kind of like a resource video about that sometime. But Reedsy is a very good platform, but it's also kind of a higher end platform. For example, I ended up getting 2 developmental edits, and both of them were from pretty well-renowned published authors. One of the authors that I worked with, I walked into Books A Million one day, and their book was on the front shelf. And so that was really cool that, hey, this person follows me on Instagram. Hey, this person has read, a version of my book. Unfortunately, they read they read the worst version of my book. But the whole developmental edit process that I went through with them, was what helped me take it from a really, really bad book that I thought was good, into, a book that I thought was good, and so far has turned out to be pretty good. But both of those developmental edits cost me around $2,500. Not because a developmental edit should cost you $2,500, but because I was hiring somebody kind of in the industry, who, again, you could walk into Books a Million and see their books. And so that was really cool. But looking back on it, it was something that was, just totally unnecessary. But I did learn a lot kind of from what they put forth. And so I kind of consider that my, I didn't go to art school, I didn't go to creative writing class, but I did go through that process, and I spent a semester's worth at college, to do that. So I did learn a lot from doing that. Another thing that I kind of ended up doing that kind of cost me a lot of money is I just wasn't satisfied with it, right? So I would do a developmental edit, that cost me $2,500, and then I would, kind of take a look at what I had, and I'd be like, this isn't good enough. Like, there is something that fundamentally doesn't work. And so so this is episode 1, and it's only 150 pages, but the original manuscript for my story consisted of 5 episodes, so 5 little 150 page books, and I think it kind of ended up calculating to around 100,000 words. So I had 5 episodes that kind of equaled up to 100,000 words. So before I broke it down into this, it was originally something a little bit bigger, and so it was much more unwieldy at that time. But it was also, I think, a really good idea for me, because there were a lot of things that I wanted to start in the beginning and kind of bring around full circle at the end. And so it's easier to look at something as a whole, rather than looking at it as an individual. So I did have an advantage there. But at the same time, I also realized that there was something fundamentally about the entire thing that just did not work. And for the longest time, for years actually, I could not figure out what didn't work. Like, why did the story just not make sense to me? Like, it felt good, but it just didn't play out good kind of in the long haul. So to say that I stopped numbering my drafts at around 16, and some of those, to say that they were all like a full rewrite, I think would be a bit of an overstatement. They were not all full rewrites. For 5 or 6 of them, I would probably just rewrite a significant portion, just to see if that would kind of, make things better. But I stopped numbering my drafts at 16, and I probably did do about 10 full rewrites. And then even after that, once I kind of broke it down into the small book, I actually quit numbering them, and so I would call it like the gold edition or the sparrow edition, or I think I ended up, like, the last one that I did was like the full gold heron edition. So I was just coming up with these random names because I was just so sick of doing these drafts. But I think that's also kind of what I learned to go through as a writer, and I think that that's really been my biggest strength, is that I took so long to kind of like rewrite and just make sure that everything kind of felt polished and smooth. And so, again, the difficulty in that is that I would do a couple of drafts. I would personally feel that it was good enough to work on, and then I would send it to an editor, spend, several $100s getting it edited or fixed up, and they would send it back to me with some critiques, and I'd be like, oh, dang, this sucks. Like, I can't believe I just sent this out and spent that money. But, eventually, you kind of have to say to yourself, like, enough is enough. And so that's where, it kind of culminated. I was like, look, I have this story idea. I've believed in it for, 8, 9 years now. What I really have to do is just get it out there and, take what I have and make the most of it. And so, that's what I did. I kind of went around and I found a very reasonable, very awesome, independent editing company. They're called Enchanted Ink. And Natalia Lee, who kind of runs that, she has a YouTube channel. And they do really great work, and they do editing, developmental edits and copy edits and line edits, and they do it all for a much more reasonable price. Like, I cannot sing enough praises. Like, they are professional and they do what you want them to do, but not for just an absolute ridiculous amount of money. Okay, but So, I worked with them and, got the book edited again, and that cost, another couple of $1,000. And then, doing the book cover, the art itself, I'll post a better picture. I know the lighting's kind of weird. But I had a really good experience working with my cover artist, and that was a super cool experience. And one of the videos I want to, make actually is about how to, kind of maybe find a good cover artist, or, how to interact with artists on, online, through Instagram, things like that. But the book cover kind of cost me around $1,300, and so I'm very glad of that expense. But it was also, it was a great opportunity, but it was also a lot of money, right? And so me being a digital artist, one of the things that I've kind of been practicing, is how can I get my art to that level so that maybe I could, alleviate some of those costs. But my art has to be good enough, right? It can't just suck and me throw it on there, right? But even after all of that, just getting the pieces together was really, a hard thing to do. But then actually, putting those pieces into a book form, right? Getting it on Amazon, right? Like, just because you have the book cover does not mean that the resolution and the dimensions of it fit on Amazon's self-publishing application, right? That was such a hassle. I don't know why, but it was a pain in the butt for me to do. But I did that, and then finally kind of getting it on Amazon. And starting to sell it to people. So my first book, and I'm very proud of this little book. I think so far I have sold around 100 copies, 70 of those through Amazon, and then another 35 or so through personal sales, and kind of handing those out to people. And so for a first book, while that's not maybe as monumental as some people think, most self-published books, kind of from what I have researched, they only end up selling 200 copies in total. So for me to have kind of made half of that, just in the 2-3 months that it's been out, because I released it on April 7th, 2023. So for me to have sold half of, the expected lifetime amount of sales, right? To me is really, really cool. And, at least on Amazon for a couple of days, right? Just for a couple of days, we were at number like 760 something for fantasy adventure fiction. And so I just want to thank everybody who did buy it, and who is maybe interested in it, because we got pretty up there, right? Like, when there's 100,000 other books in your category, to be in the top 1,000 on your first book, is really cool. So I'm very excited about that. So moving forward, I've learned a lot, and I have book 1 done. It's here. It's available on Amazon in hardback and ebook, and I have episode 2 written. It's basically complete. It needs to go through the editing process. I've been finalizing some cover art, and some really cool things like that. So episode 2 is on the way, and it just kind of depends on when the editors have an opportunity. They're very popular. They're usually booked for months ahead, and so one of the things that I want to do is by the time that book 2 does release, maybe have books 3 and 4 ready to go. And so I'm very excited for what the future holds, and I hope you guys will join me on that. So I'm going to go ahead and get to recording some of those resource videos talking about Reedsy and some of these other applications that I used to help bring the broken world to life. And if you're interested, I hope you'll watch them. So let me know what you think. Tell me how the channel's going, and what you would like to see. I would be very interested in, if you're an independent author, I would love to read your book. I would love to review your book. I'd love to talk about it. And that would be, just something for me to do here and kind of connect with that community. So let me know what you think. Peace out.